Today's first reading is from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 20. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. This is what you requested of the Lord your God, or Harb, on the day of assembly, when you said, "Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire any more, lest I die." Then the Lord replied to me, "They are right in what they have said. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their own people. I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet, who shall speak to them everything that I command. Anyone who does not heed the words of the prophet, who presumes to speak in my name a word that I have not commanded the prophet to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die." Today's gospel is from Mark 1, chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. Those of you that are able, please stand. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What do you do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. You may be seated. I realized as Gary was talking that I had too many things in my pockets, so bear with me as I make room for the battery pack. So friends, it is good to be together today as we continue our journey of becoming the people of God. We've been looking at what that means, or part of what that means for the last couple of weeks. Though we know, of course, that journey began before those couple of weeks, and right, the journey is going to continue long after these couple of weeks, that we are on a constant journey of becoming the people of God. But in this time between Epiphany and the baptism of Jesus and Lent that's coming up now in just a couple of weeks, we have been looking at how God gifts and equips us in that journey of becoming, and especially in this in-between time. And so you remember that we listened for the voice of God. We practiced deep listening with Samuel and Philip and Nathaniel. And then with Jonah and with Simon and Andrew and James and John, we received that persistent, grace-filled urge to respond to that call. Once we've heard God, how do we respond? And so we have been looking at that call and response way of life. So what brings us, what do we do now? What's the next step? Though, of course, these aren't particularly linear and distinct, but ongoing, right? Just as we become the people of God, we are constantly both listening and responding and discerning. And that's what we're talking about today, right? Discerning is part of that call and response relationship with God. It's when we discern the movement of God within our individual lives, but also within our communal life as the people of God at this place called Wall Street. And we listen for what God is doing. We start depending on God's grace, God's guidance to tell us what should we be investing in? What should our hearts be engaging? How should we live? Who should we be? Where should we go? What should we do? Right? If we are to use that example of singing as a call and response, then what we are talking about with discernment is listening for God's song in every part of our lives. It's us becoming aware of the fact that God's song is being sung everywhere and at all times. And discerning is part of listening and learning what we need to do to respond, or how we're being called to respond, or what opportunities or options we have for responding. So it is my intention today to be brief with the sermon. In fact, I'm putting my little phone up here so I can see what time we have today, because what I want us to do is to have time to have a chance to practice discernment together in this space, in this time, right? So we're going to spend most of our time in all of our time in the congregational prayer time, but most of our time in this service practicing discernment. But I want to take just a few minutes at this point to highlight some of those things about discernment that I think will help us when we practice. So a couple of things for us to keep in mind. One is that discernment occurs from among the people, right? Discernment can be individual, absolutely. It can be communal, absolutely. It can be both, right? It can be either. But in every case, discernment is helped, I think, by being in conversation. In conversation with God, absolutely, but also in conversation with each other, or in conversation with other people in your life who can help us to discern, right? Because oftentimes there are doors of opportunities that God has put for us to walk through, and we don't even know they're there, let alone know how to open them, right? So I've shared with some of you that one of the kind of key activities on my journey of answering God's call to ministry in the church was when I was, Wayne and I were members of a church. I don't think, Nathan might have just been born. Zoe and Savannah were young. And I got a call from Doris, and Doris said, I want you to come to lunch with me. Doris lived at the retirement home nearby. I said, sure, Doris, I'd love to do that. Came to lunch. There were 3 other people with Doris at the lunch table. I did not know any of them. And so we're eating and we exchanged pleasantries, and then when lunch was almost over, Doris turned to the other people and said, so Kathy is the one that I think should start preaching at our weekly Vesper service. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, friends. I didn't even know that Doris knew who I was. I mean, like, I knew she knew that I was in church with her, right? But I didn't even know that Doris knew anything about me, other than she looks familiar. I think she sits on that side of the sanctuary, right? But Doris discerned that there was something there. And so I was part of a team that did preach at their weekly Vespers. And that was part of the nurturing that led me to finally say yes to God when God was calling me into ministry, right? I don't know that I would have had I definitely would not have had the same journey. And I don't even know if I would have realized that the journey was there if Doris had not said, here's the door to that path, and then kicked it down and pushed me through it, right? Right? So we need to be together in conversation, because sometimes we don't know. We don't recognize our own gifts and graces, or we don't see an opportunity and somebody else does, right? And so remembering that discernment happens in conversation, that it comes from among the people, right, is helpful for us as we seek to understand what God might be calling us to do and how we might respond. And one of the other beautiful pieces of discernment is by saying that it's a communal activity, one of the things that we are recognizing is that the community itself has the gifts, the skills and the assets that we need to become a place where God's love reigns, right? So God is not just calling into a void. God is calling into a people, individually and collectively, that God has gifted to be able to respond to that call, right? And so part of what we're doing is we're helping each other to see what God's specific calling is for us at this time. It does not mean that that is God's only calling. It does not mean that God is not also calling our brothers and sisters at the churches on other corners of this street. But what it means is that God also is very specifically calling us, not just Wall Street, but us, not Wall Street of 10 years ago. God called Wall Street of 10 years ago, 10 years ago. God calls us now, and we now have the gifts and skills and assets needed to become a place where God's love reigns, right? And we are constantly on that journey of becoming. But I want to assure you that we have what God needs for us to become the people of God, right? We have it. We have it. But what we need to do together, and this is part of discernment too, is to learn how to cultivate those gifts and skills and to cultivate responses that give life, that give hope, that give peace, that give joy, that give love, instead of cultivating responses that obstruct that, right? When God is speaking with Moses and talking about raising up a prophet like Moses from among the people, God is very clear that there's a responsibility to get it right, to proclaim God's message of life, not to tear each other down. So we need to hear words of life. We need to cultivate those gifts that bring life. Now, don't hear me saying that means that we're just like, oh, everything's great. There's nothing bad in the world and everything's fine, right? Because sometimes cultivating life, and those of you who are gardeners, Joan, you understand this. Sometimes cultivating life means digging some stuff out and throwing it away, right? Breaking off that part that's dead, right? Or that doesn't serve life anymore. It involves kind of reimagining how we might be spaced together. Sometimes cultivating life means pruning or letting go. But even that needs to be done in a way that represents the God of life that we know in Jesus Christ, that we experience through the Holy Spirit. So nurture with all that hard work that goes into it. So the example is, if you have been to my office, you know that I am not an organized person, that I have a very cluttered life. I do not like decluttering. I don't like going through things. I don't like having to figure out what to do with them, right? But boy, does it feel good when space is cleaned out so that you can have a life that flourishes in the midst of it, right? So that when you're not overwhelmed by stuff and can actually do the things that bring you joy, right? So it's kind of like that. And so sometimes in that cultivating life, sometimes it means that our call as a community is to heal those voices that oppose life. And those can be voices that come from among the people too. And those can be voices that come from within ourselves. What do I mean by those voices that oppose life? I mean those voices that snarl, "What have you to do with us, Jesus, Son of Nazareth?" Those voices that come up communally, individually within us that say, we don't want to have that stuff cleared out so that life can flourish. Or we don't want there to be any kind of change or we don't want we don't want to think about a different way, or we don't want to even recognize that there is a different way, or there can be a different way, or there's a different calling now than there was 10 years ago, or that might be a different calling in 10 years, right? But we need to heal that. Jesus heals the man who opposes him, right? He heals him. And, not but, and he says, enough with the voices that speak against life. It's time for those disruptions to be silenced, to be healed. It is hard. I don't know about you, but in me, there is always a voice that is like, well, I mean, you could do that, but, oh gosh, it's raining outside. Oh, you know what? You probably need to run a few errands before you do. Oh, I don't know that you're the person to do it. I think that probably there's somebody else who could do it better. I don't know about you, but that voice is constantly there. And that voice needs to be healed and needs to be told, the time for nurturing life is now. The time for nurturing life is now. And you and I and we, with all those other voices talking, are called now to the nurturing of life. That's what it means. And the best way for us to stand for life against death, against those voices that speak against the nurturing of life, those voices that say, you can't do it, we can't do it, it's not for us. The best way to stand against those voices is to tell a better story. To tell a better story. To sing a better song like we talked about last week. To sing God's song. To tell the story of a different way of being. A different way of being a family. A different way of being a community. A different way of being individuals in this world. The way that God calls us to be. People who nurture life, who speak joy, who speak hope, who speak justice, who speak mercy and compassion and love and grace. We need to tell a better story. And that's not a way of avoiding confrontation with evil. What it's saying is, we're not going to play by evil's game. It's not about shouting down. It's not about winning the fight. It is about transforming and nurturing life. And so when we hear God call and we discern a new way, it's saying that purpose of discernment is for us as individuals and as the people of God to move closer to joy. For us as people in our communities to be a people of joy, and for us to live authentically as the people that God has gifted and graced us to be. Us specifically, right? Us specifically. And living authentically honors the ways that God has uniquely gifted us, because it helps to move us more fully into God's dream for us. God's vision for our community and for our world. So living in joy is an act of resistance against the negative narratives that the world shares. That things aren't going to get better, that everybody is out for themselves, that he who has the most toys at the end wins, right? All of those negative narratives, and we are called to tell a different story and to sing a different song. A song that says that our value comes from the fact that we are created in the image of God and that we are beloved, not from what we do. A story that talks about the worth of every single person. The idea that every single person, God desires all of us, each of us, to flourish and to have abundant life. It's telling the story that our job as the people of God is not to beat everybody else, but to live for everybody else so that they can experience the joy of life too. So that's the framework for discernment that we're going to be kind of working within in our congregational prayer time. This idea that discernment comes from among the people, that we have the gifts and skills and assets that we need to be the people of God, that we need to cultivate responses that are life-giving. That idea that sometimes that means as a community where we need to heal the voices that oppose life-giving, and that the best way to do that is to tell a better story. So, as we think about that, we're going to prepare our hearts for that work of discernment, and we're going to do that right now by praying for our own healing. And we're going to pray for our own healing through the hymn that we're about to sing. So I hope that as you stand up, if you feel led to do that, or as you sit and listen to the hymn, or as you read the words of the hymn, look at this as a prayer of healing that helps to remove or set aside or prune those things that make it hard for us to nurture life. Alrighty. So, friends who are worshiping online, I invite you to grab a notebook or a piece of paper and something to write with. Friends in the sanctuary, I invite you to grab something to write with. And then I have a paper for you. So, friends, there are many discernment tools. And Steve, I've got a little clicker, so I'll kind of go through this together. There are many discernment tools. We are going to be using one called the Recycle. And it was created by a group called the Neighboring Movement. Make note of that because you'll want to look them up later. It's really a great group. And they, in working with the United Methodist Church Discipleship Ministries, came up with ways of doing individual and group discernment. We're gonna do a version of the individual discernment together to start practicing what that might look like. And this one is a kind of 10-minute version that is heavily influenced by the Examine. So if any of you have ever engaged in that spiritual practice of the Examine, a lot of this is going to feel familiar to you, okay? But what we'd like to do today is to begin by centering ourselves and to center ourselves in prayer. And I left my bulletin up here. But we're going to center ourselves in prayer using that monthly prayer that we have been looking at the last couple of weeks. Because this is kind of the guiding question that we are asking in this time for us as individuals, but also for us together. So it is on the front of your bulletin. It is our monthly prayer. And I invite you, begins with those words, Eternal One. It is that one sentence. I invite you to take a deep breath and let it out. Take a deep breath. Let it out. And let us pray this as our kind of focusing prayer. Will you join me? Eternal One, help us understand what you would have Wall Street do and be to bring your kingdom of love to this place, this time. So this is our focusing question. So kind of keep that in mind as you are discerning and praying together. And we start with remembering. So we remember it's a way of putting the story together. Remember, we're looking for ways that God's story is already happening in our lives. And so we're going to do this by very simply remembering the past 24 hours, or if you didn't do much yesterday, you can make it the past couple of days, the past week. I want you, those of you who have the papers here, just go down that left side, there's spaces for you, and just write down a word or two of everything you did. in the last 24 hours or so, right? You don't have to say, write down washing the dishes every, 5 times or 7 times. You can write washing the dishes times 25, it feels like, for us in the last 24 hours, right? Right? But I want us to just take some time, write down the story of your life, the last 24, 48 hours, maybe the last week. What are the things that you have done? Now you can continue to write things down, or you can kind of leave it where it is for right now. But the next piece that we move into then is to reflect. So looking back at those events that you've listed, and you can either use that column on the right where there's a spectrum between way opening and way closing, or there's some questions on the back where it says, make a star by one of them or a circle. But it's probably just easiest to mark on that spectrum. What we're going to start doing is noticing those places where we feel in our lives, where we feel like there's a way opening or a way closing. Now, a way opening, a way to say it might be, what are those things or activities that you did where you felt like, oh man, you felt alive, or you felt like you were in the flow of who you are and what you love to do and what God is calling you to? Or where did you feel like there's energy behind it, even if it is a hard or sad thing to do, right? So it could be something you saw in the news, breaks your heart, and yet you feel an energy there that is a way opening, that is where that you feel God moving, or you feel God kind of pulling at you. Then the opposite side is that idea of that way closing. Where are those places where the work felt draining, right? Where even if it was a good thing that you were supposed to like, it just kind of felt you feel like there's a block happening. Could have been something that was a way opening, that's been a way opening for you for a long time, but is starting to feel like maybe this is not the season anymore, right? So kind of go through each of those things on your list and mark them on that spectrum. Where are you with those between a way opening and a way closing? Or you can just write O or C next to them. This is how we start to begin looking at where God is moving and speaking to us in our daily lives. So thinking again about that sentence, our prayer, asking God to reveal what God wants us to be as the people of Wall Street. Who does God want you to be as your individual selves? Beginning to get a sense of where God is moving in your everyday life, where ways are opening and ways are closing. Now we get to do something that's kind of fun. And that is to reveal some of what God might be calling us to do, or some of what we might be some of the ways we might be responding. And we do that through a mini experiment. Or if you'd rather say it this way, a mini act of play, right? It's an experiment because we don't know what the outcome is going to be. Don't know what the outcome is going to be for you. But what we're endeavoring to do in that experience is for you in the next 24 hours or the next week, you pick a time, but short, right, before next Sunday, what are you going to do that can help move you closer to joy? So as you look at those ways open, those ways that are opening or those ways that are closing, what is one thing, one small thing, and in fact, when you write it down, like don't use more than 12 words to describe what your experiment's going to be, right? What is one thing that you're going to do to move you closer to joy? So for me, it might be, I'm going to clean off the desk in my office so that I have more room to dream with God, right? So it could be, that's what we're talking about, mini. So just take a minute to think about that and write that down with reveal. Okay, with that mini experiment taking shape in your mind, we are going to practice release because you are free to fail. I said we don't know what this experiment, what the results are going to be. And it may be that it doesn't work, or that it opens you up to something new that you're like, oh, I really did not want to go there, right? Or it didn't bring you the joy that you thought it would. That's okay. We're going to engage in a litany in just a second, but I want to give you an example. Yesterday at the mending event, Millie started to teach me how to knit. Now you will notice that I do not have a freshly knitted scarf on me, or vest, or blanket, because she started to teach me. And it's a learning process because I didn't do well. In fact, more often than not, I would do a couple of stitches and then I would show it to Millie and Millie would say, well, we can take those off and we can start again, right? So that's what it is. Imagine that Millie is sitting next to you as you experiment, and if things go wrong, she will be there to say, that's okay. We can start again. We could try something different. Let me help you, okay? So, will you join me in this litany of release? Will you repeat after me? I am gifted. I am loved. I am free to fail. We are gifted. We are loved. We are free to fail. Absolutely. Okay, so when you start getting anxious about it, say those words again. Remind yourself, okay? When that voice pops up, right? That voice that says, opposed to joy, say those words, okay? And then reach. We're going to take action. So I want you right now to write down when you are going to do this experiment. Make a commitment to yourself. I'm going to do this experiment tomorrow or this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Because what we don't want is this to be another thing where we're like, yeah, it would be nice if my desk got cleaned off, right? And then another week passes, right? So make that commitment to yourself. And as you are experimenting, continue to keep that question in front of you. What is God calling us to do and be as individual disciples and together as the people at Wall Street United Methodist Church? Okay? So let's start experimenting and playing and discerning where God is already at work, where God is already singing, and where we might join him. And we will talk about that next week. So there will be grades passed out on how you're, no, there won't. You're free to fail. But give yourself the gift of this opportunity. All right? So as loved, redeemed, forgiven, free to fail people of God, let us join our hearts together and pray as Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.